Welcome to the Climate and Coordination RCAST, where every week we'll be discussing topics related to all things climate change and RChain's role in the solution. We will be discussing technologies that can adapt and coordinate massive amounts of data like never before, forming social architectures that grow collective intelligence, sharing and evaluating data planetarily, all while maintaining personal privacy and personal data ownership. A new decentralized economy is forming as we move from the third industrial revolution, digitization, to the fourth, decarbonization. By building a co-op, built on a correct by construction, concurrent, scalable solution, RChain is structured to build out the new technology that will be required for a flourishing regenerative planet. Please join us on this journey.
Okay, wonderful. Well, good morning and welcome to this week's iteration of the Climate and Coordination RCAST. There's lots to talk about today. It starts a little bit glib, but it ends with some hope. So I've been really trying to curate these articles in a way that kind of gives people awareness of the pickle that we're in, but also awareness that we can turn it around. I'm trying to strike that balance. So hopefully this will work in that direction. And there's also a story at the end, Greg, that I chose specifically for you.
Oh, hooray, hooray.
Yes. So the first story for today, this is a breaking piece of news that actually I just discovered in the last 24 hours. And it's very important to talk about it because it's happening on a geologic scale. And there are not very many pieces of news that happen on a geologic scale in our lifetime. So this is from USA Today. It's on all the major news platforms. We've now passed 420 parts per million of CO2, and that has not happened in 3.6 million years. So we are now having a level of carbon dioxide that is in the atmosphere that is unprecedented in a very, very, very long time. The hope was that, and Darryl, I wanted to connect this with you because we talked about this for a long time. The hope was that COVID-19 would slow down the time at which human beings would reach 420. And unfortunately, that has not happened. There was a slight dip of, I think, around 7 to 9% of global emissions temporarily, but that did not last. So unfortunately, we are basically back to where we were. It's as if we didn't even have COVID, I think, in terms of carbon dioxide. I just wanted to read a little bit about this because I think it's so important for people to realize what's happening. It says, in fact, the level of carbon dioxide in Earth's atmosphere is now higher than it has been in at least 3.6 million years, federal scientists announced on Wednesday. At that time, sea levels were as much as 78 feet higher. The average temperature was 7 degrees Fahrenheit higher than in pre-industrial levels. Greenland was mostly green, and Antarctica had trees, which is fascinating. It says overall levels of carbon dioxide and methane, the two most important greenhouse gases, continued their unrelenting rise in 2020, despite the economic slowdown caused by the pandemic, according to scientists from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. So that's NOAA. And NOAA is basically the gold standard for this science around the world. And I really recommend everybody follow them on Twitter because they always have great reports and news coming out about climate. Human activity is driving climate change. That's what NOAA says today. If we want to mitigate the worst impacts, it's going to take a deliberate focus on reducing fossil fuel emissions to near zero. And even then, we'll need to look for ways to further remove greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. Also, they reported this past Wednesday, I believe it was, that in the past 20 years, the world's temperature has risen about 2/3 of a degree. Now, when they say 7 degrees Fahrenheit, the person who wrote this article says 7 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm curious if they meant to say Celsius on average, but that's not clear to me exactly how hot it was 3.6-ish million years ago, when I think what they're saying is they're saying that the Arctic had no ice, which we know there were times when the Arctic had no ice. It says here the global surface average for carbon dioxide was 412.5 parts per million in 2020, rising by 2.6 parts per million during the year. The global rate of increase was the 5th highest in NOAA's 63-year record. So anyway, I think if you look at different websites, there's going to be some slightly different numbers about how we got here. And obviously scientists are still trying to figure out exactly what we're headed into here, but certainly it's going to get hotter. So I'll pause there, see if anybody has any comments about that.
Well, I'd say that if we even stopped entirely emitting any carbon for a year, it wouldn't slow it down because it's already on its trajectory. So it's kind of stating the obvious to me.
Right. Yeah, that's true. I think the hope was that maybe it would delay some extra carbon going into the atmosphere, maybe not delay the overall heating of the planet, but I think there was some hope there that the great pause or the great shutdown or whatever would have a positive impact. But yeah, no, I agree with you. It's been going for so long. This is 100 years in the making. So, yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah, it's so sobering that my mind just reaches for the absurd. My mind is just going, okay, you really have to get that Tesla now.
Yeah, totally.
It's just,
that wouldn't hurt.
No, it wouldn't hurt, but it's like I hope everyone thinks about some small change they can make. But I do think if we were to take an approach like COVID and say stay home more, don't fly in airplanes, just really basic stuff, it would definitely have an impact. It would, everything that has happened about not having to go to the office, not having to go to school, all of those are changes that could be made more permanent, and definitely have a positive impact.
Yeah. And I think not only do they have a positive impact on the environment, they have a positive impact on families and people's mental health. And, because like people don't want to sit in traffic for hours every day. Maybe some people do. That's fine if they want to go and do that. But yeah, I feel like there's a lot we can learn from this past year. And hopefully there will be some changes made that not only help the earth, but help ourselves directly. Obviously, everything that helps the earth helps us indirectly. But yeah, I agree with that. So if there are not any more comments about that piece of geologic news, which we just all happen to be alive for to see and experience, there's a very short little blurb that Bill McKibbon posted in the New Yorker, published in the New Yorker about 2 weeks ago And I really loved this sentiment. I don't think it's even a full article. I think it's just a little blurb that links to another piece about the border crisis. And it's called There Are No Borders in a Climate Crisis. Greenhouse gases will sail right across even the biggest, most beautiful wall. And the reason I wanted to mention this is because I felt like it's so important to talk about the fact that the climate crisis has no borders. I feel like this was not a mainstream idea even 5 years ago. Well, maybe not, maybe it was, but I didn't realize it. And I just really appreciate what Bill has written here. And I just wanted to read most of it, which is basically one long paragraph. And I'm just glad that it's in the New Yorker, because I feel like this kind of thinking is going to be really, really helpful for our ability to weather the storm, as it were, and also coordinate solutions using empathy and science. It says here, to give an example, owing in part to climate change, there was a record hurricane season last year, with the last two storms, Eta and Iota, striking Central America. As Nicole Maria explained in a recent article in Vox, the Northern Triangle countries, Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador, have been afflicted by climate-induced drought for a decade, leaving 3.5 million people facing food insecurity. But the floods from those two storms produced even more savage damage. 1,200 schools were damaged or destroyed. That's crazy to me. 40% of corn crops and 60% of the bean harvest were lost. As a percentage of GDP, the damage is greater than that done by the worst storms ever hit to the United States. Yet the people of these countries did comparatively little to cause the climate crisis, whereas the 4% of us who live in this country, the United States, have produced more greenhouse gases than the population of almost any other nation. So there's really no way to pretend that migrants arriving at our southern border have no claim on America. Honduras could have built the biggest, most beautiful wall on its northern border, and our CO2 would still have sailed right across it. So, I don't want to get too political, necessarily in this forum, but I feel like it's important that, every country, when they emit greenhouse gases, it affects every other country, So I just think that's such an important sentiment, and to understand that it's going to take global cooperation and the time to point fingers and all that, especially, when it comes to other nations. I feel like it's going to end soon. So are there any comments about that?
Well, I mean, this is what I've been saying for quite some time. And I've been, I know that it's, and the people who say it early are going to not be treated well, regardless of its truth or veracity. The issue is that the consequences of climate change are global, and the coordinated actions that we need to take are global, and they are not going to respect the jurisdictional boundaries of the nation states, and that's that, and that's going to have consequences like we've never seen before, right? I mean, right now, the United States has been involved in how many wars in the last 10 years? And that's all, nation state boundary stuff. The whole caricature of the pressure that the Central Americans are under because of climate change as a caravan heading towards the United States. There's a kernel of truth to that, which is that many of the people there are under enormous pressure, and they're going to become climate migrants and climate refugees, and there's nothing that can be done about that except to offer humanitarian aid, especially since the United States, for example, is largely responsible for a lot of what has made their region so stressed. But this situation is only going to get worse. And you read an article, either it was last week or the week before, that talked about how the tropical zones under the current projected rise in CO2 and attendant temperature rise are going to be uninhabitable in a very short period of time. And that's 40% of the world's population is going to have to move. So we're in a real dire situation. And it's a situation that is global. If you say America first, we're going to build a wall around our entire country and nobody's getting in and we're just going to take care of ourselves. That is not going to work. And it is a tough situation to be in. And I don't think there are any answers other than to admit as fast as possible that this is a global issue and get on board with how we coordinate globally.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I have one more story. I actually have another one that I saved. It's not even recent, but I have it just in case. But I wanted to share this one first because it's a good piece of news, and I saw it and immediately thought of you, Greg, because we're always talking about, what is the value of a whale? What is the value of a tree? How can we learn to value these things when they're alive and not just, pay for them and kill them? This article kind of talks about that, and it's from the Seattle Times, so it's local to you. It says here, amid the climate crisis, a proposal to save Washington state forests for carbon storage, not logging. So this is great. It says Capital State Forest, which is, of course, older than Washington state. The biggest Douglas firs on this patch of state forest land have stood through more than a century of logging, part of a 180-acre timber sale auctioned off for $4.2 million last November by the state DNR, Department of Natural Resources. And the trees were going to be going to a mill for plywood. And then it says something unusual happened. Hillary Franz, state commissioner of public lands, pulled back nearly 40 acres, which is, I guess, almost a fourth of this. 40 acres with most of the biggest, oldest trees from the sale. So she basically sectioned off a piece of the land that had gone for auction and said that you can't cut it down. It says here, now this timber sale named Smuggler, sales are often whimsically named by state foresters, also is swinging open a door to a broader conversation in Washington, home to the second largest lumber producer in the nation, to rethink the value of trees on state lands, not as logs, but as trees to help address the twin crises of species extinction and climate warming. France is kicking off an examination over the next 3 to 4 months of all older forests on DNR lands west of the Cascades, not already in conservation status, which is about 10,000 additional acres. It talks about other conservation efforts that have happened in the past. Talks about the incredible efficacy of trees to sequester carbon, which is fascinating and important, and a very good help towards keeping temperatures rising, hopefully at a lower rate, and then hopefully stabilizing them, and then hopefully someday having them come back down. It says here, so-called proforestation, which is a new term that I didn't know about. Proforestation is the leading edge of new science that finds intentionally leaving forests to grow bigger helps blunt the worst effects of the climate catastrophe. Of course, fossil fuel emissions must also be radically reduced. I don't know if this is really supposed to be surprising that leaving the trees is better for the planet, but whatever. Whenever people find the answer is great. Also, it says here, and I think this is a absolutely great thing. It says public comment will be heard at the regularly scheduled meetings of the State Board of Natural Resources. And there's a link to that, which meets the first Tuesday of every month. Meanwhile, DNR Department of Natural Resources does not anticipate bringing forward any sales with older forests. So it's great that they're having these public forums so people can come and talk to them and express their opinion. So I think I put the link in the chat here. Yeah, of the article. Towards the bottom, there is a link. I can open it and see. And basically, it just gives the it gives the details of how you can watch these meetings. I think right now they're doing them through Zoom. I'm not sure how long that's going to happen for, but there's the link right there, dnr.wa.gov. And I just think it's so cool that the Seattle Times decided to share this story, but also that they gave the resources to other people who want to be more involved and vocal with the government and with the DNR about how they feel about their forests. Because public opinion on this is really strong, but it's not always so easy to make your voice heard to a public official. So there's a potential resource for people who live in Washington.
That is really cool. That is awesome. I'm so glad to see an action like that. And it really, it takes people, right? People who are involved in these processes to make a good decision. One person making one good decision can have such a huge impact.
Yeah, and I'm so glad to see there's starting to be a shift in culture about the value of whales, the value of trees, the value of tigers, the value of land, dirt, good soil.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. I mean, the funniest thing, I remember I was in a courtyard in Chateaué Azur, which is a suburb of Dakar in Senegal. And I had eaten an orange and the peels were on the ground next to me and the ants were already carting them away. And I thought, what an amazing system, right? As a technologist, I was looking at it going, wow, it's already, the system was already built with all of the recycling in place.
Oh, because they were going to take it into to be fertilizer, you think?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. They were using it for nutrient and
sure.
And I just, it was so clear to me how, the natural world had already fit together, all of the pieces so that they formed a virtuous cycle. And it was
right.
It was only the weird humans that were out of step with that virtuous cycle.
Right. Yeah, that's so funny. I was actually just I've been watching and rewatching some documentaries with David Attenborough because he's so amazing. And I was really struck by that as well, watching it. Just like there's no need for bathrooms even, like all of this complicated stuff about waste and trash. And there were even certain plants that were designed to survive only in certain forests because there was a certain animal that pollinated it in a certain way. And this plant animal relationship only exists in this one forest. And it's crazy. Like nature has tailor-made these relationships that last. And it's just stunning to watch. And I hope that kind of consciousness is going to enter more into the mainstream. Obviously, we can't devolve. Nobody wants to live in a cave anymore. Well, maybe we are going to live in caves nowadays. I don't know. But I think there is a way to move forward with that knowledge,
Yeah, but it's that kind of awareness that shifts the value assessment, right? I mean, I try to imagine what a neighborhood looks like to a developer, and then what a neighborhood looks like to someone who has a different relationship to the natural world. Because you can just see it, in the way the buildings spring up, like every plot of green is turned into, some 4-story, you know, condominium structure or apartment structure that has very little value, since for every homeless person in the US there are 2 empty buildings. So very little real value. Whereas the green has this enormous value if we are awake to it, if it's alive in us.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that you seem to say over and over again, Greg, that, is so true, is that really, if we're going to actually conquer this problem, we have to go through a massive radical transformation of who we are as a species. It's like it's as big or bigger than the transformation that happened at the birth of civilization, when humans started to congregate in larger groups, and started to form agrarian societies. We somehow developed this idea that we can control the cycles of the planet. We formed religions that would say things like, God gave man dominion over the earth. And we started formulating these ideas that we could kind of somehow, control things, because, we had learned how to kind of control things in a smaller setting through agrarian technology. So we have to go through that kind of a shift very quickly as a species, like never before. We have to do something we have never done before.
Well, Darryl, hold on to your hat, because if you look at, where computing was in the 50s, that's like where we are today with biotech. Right. So if you're around for the next 10, 20 years, you're going to see some massive changes.
Wow.
Oh, that's very true. That's absolutely true.
Yeah, I believe we can do it. But it's going to be that kind of a massive shift. It's going to be an exciting ride.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I think I was just put in the chat, the monolith moment, because I was thinking so much about 2001 Space Odyssey, but I think
yeah, exactly.
A big question, because I don't think there's any question that technology is going to advance extremely quickly, and we're already in this shift. I feel like we are experiencing a boom in technology. We're experiencing a boom in science. We're entering a new golden age of space travel. There's a lot going on there. The genome stuff is getting better. But I really wonder if human beings are going to have that big of an evolutionary shift inside of us, in our spirit and in our, this sounds a little flower girl, but I mean, are we really going, because we can create technology that has empathy. We can create policy that has empathy. We can create, systems that are more efficient and ethical, that kind of stuff. But it's can human beings also make that shift? And because I feel like that will also be really important, but I wonder how human beings are going to progress along that timeline, not just with the external, but the internal.
Yeah, I can't see it happening without music. I mean, I'm biased, but I believe that like Ian Cross believes that music was the most important thing we did as a species, because it's actually, according to the theory, what accelerated us some 150,000 years ago, when we had some other competing species surrounding us. And we developed what Greg calls our superpower, our social skills. Those social skills came out of the discovery of music, I believe. So I think we're going to have to look to music again as one of the catalysts for this rapid shift, this rapid change. I believe that, we've seen music as a catalyst more recently in technology. If you look at the pre-web internet, the Usenet news groups, they were propagated by music. If you look at peer-to-peer technology, it was propagated by music. If you look at the phone that everyone holds in their hand, it started off as a music playing device. This isn't some crazy weird idea. And you look at right now with the explosion of NFTs, starting with art, but we're going to see it truly expand and evolve rapidly through music. So, yes, I'm biased, but I think that when the power of music is allowed to thrive, we'll see some of these rapid changes happen.
I definitely believe in much of what you say, Darryl. I mean, certainly amongst all of the coordination technologies that we've come up with to date, music, it has some magical properties. I mean, if you one of the most striking things is to compare music as a coordinating technology to speech. Except with certain kinds of conversations and certain kinds of audiences, conversations are largely in turns, right? If you and I are both speaking, it's very difficult for us to process what each other is saying. It's not impossible, but it's very difficult, I think, for most people to do that. Whereas, the basics of harmony are that we're playing at the same time and we're listening at the same time.
Yeah.
So there's a different part of our brain that's happening when we're coordinating through music than when we're coordinating through speech. Likewise, if you look at most news programs or YouTube channels, speech seems to be really about the head as a what's involved in speech is not a lot of bodily movement, not a lot of access to rhythm. I mean, it's not true in all speech, but the predominant patterns of usage of speech in terms of coordination is not as connected to the body. Whereas, if you're a musician, that you have no choice but be connected to your body. It's just like you can't do music sustainably without being connected to your body. So there's both an organizing principle within the individual and amongst the collective that happens in music that doesn't happen through speech. So, and this is just one comparison of two human coordination technologies that I think is remarkable. And if we learn some of the principles of music, I think that might help us move to a better practical coordination.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you just said there kind of supports the Ian Cross theory, right? That music came first, and then speech came. So I attended a talk with Jaron Lanier back in 2003. Unforgettable day for me because I ended up meeting him afterwards. And in that talk, he started talking about the cuttlefish and how the cuttlefish hacked into its own body through its evolutionary path and created mirrors on its back, created this camouflage system. And then he said, humans did the same thing. We hacked into the tool that was evolved to breathe and eat with, and we created a communication system with it. Music was the first social network. and so there's more recent scientific evidence to support this theory, and that is that when they conduct functional MRIs, and they test people doing things and see what happens to the brain while people do things, they came to discover that the second most active thing that happens to the brain when we do something is listening to music. When you listen to music, every part of your brain lights up like no other activity. There's one thing that is even more active to the human brain than listening to music, and that's playing music. So
absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's why they treat a lot of Alzheimer's and other patients with music sometimes.
That's right.
They can't speak, they can't remember anything. Boom, on the piano, there's the Rachmaninoff right there. It's amazing.
Yeah.
It's like the mind doesn't want it to ever go away, so it like protects that one piece.
Right. So it kind of supports the theory that it was music that kind of woke us up from the very beginning. So we kind of need it to wake us up again.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So I attended the Climate Chain Coalition meeting on Wednesday morning.
Awesome.
Yeah, it was fantastic. It went for 2 hours. And the I guess the mediator, the person who did the main presentation, he's the co-chair of the Climate Chain Coalition. His name's Mossamba Thioye. He's an amazing dude. He's also the co-chair of the ISO Working Group 10, preparing ISO 14097, which is the working group that is preparing the standard for framework and principles for assessing and reporting climate contributions by financial institutions. So he's the co-chair of that. His main gig is he works at the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. He's a pretty amazing guy. And he did a very inspiring talk. And so I reached out to him after on LinkedIn, and actually I haven't mentioned this to you yet, Greg, but he wants to get on a call with us sometime next week.
Oh, that's wonderful news. Well, let's ask Lilia if she's available to help coordinate that.
Okay, cool.
It looks like Steve Ross Talbot joined us.
I did. I was listening intently. So a couple of things went through my mind when you talk about the music side of things. I'm always sort of fascinated by music, having had a musical upbringing, but being completely incapable. I mean, totally incapable in comparison to Nora and to you, Greg, in terms of being able to play anything except a CD. But I'm yeah. When you talk about it being the first thing, for me, I've been going through Desert Island Discs, the idea of choosing 8 songs where you're marooned, and somehow, luckily, you have a wind-up gramophone player and 8 songs, fortunately of your choice, that you're marooned with, and then what 8 songs would you choose? And I've been going through that for a number of reasons. One, it's fun to do on Zoom, although doing 8, you can't do 8 with a group of people, so you kind of separate it out into, let's choose 3 each if there's 4 of you. Worth doing this with friends. And of course I sometimes have a little dialogue with Nora about music, because I see stuff on Facebook, and she shared something, and I said, on my Desert Island Disc is this one song called Nigerian Marketplace by Oscar Peterson, which is a fantastic jazz number. And when you talk about sort of like the roots of music and your body, the thing that always got me, and I don't know if it's just me or whether this is just obvious, but there's a resonance inside your body to certain beats, I guess. Mm-hmm. So for me, I have this huge connection to sort of jazz, not all jazz. So trad jazz, oddly enough, less, but swing more. And and certain South African forms of jazz massively, and which I can contrast completely, but find completely the same element in Irish folk music. And I'm half Irish and half South African. And it's kind of like somehow in my DNA, right, there's been this intertwining of the fundamental beats within that music, and I feel it. I mean, I really feel it. You know, those songs that I take on a desert island discs are the ones that I feel in every cell of my body. So I really, what you guys were saying about, particularly you, Darryl, I totally understand that. And I sort of Google around when you guys say stuff, and I found a really interesting one. Google for it. It's the last song of a Kalahari Bushman. It's on YouTube. It's about 7 minutes, and they don't write stuff, right? They sing it. All their history is sung. And there's this tiny little video on YouTube, the last song of the Kalahari Bushman, and
check it out.
They're my antecedents. I did my DNA years ago, and I'm descended from the Khoisan, and the Khoisan were pastoralists in the Cape, and they're direct descendants of the Khoi, who were the Kalahari Bushmen.
That's so cool.
That's very interesting. Very interesting.
I mean, I'm sure you guys get that as well. When there's that song there that you really, you shut your eyes and you're it's like you're in the song. And I don't mean in the song with the words, but in the melody, in the song itself, like you're invisible from it.
Yeah. So I think that when humans first discovered rhythm, I just try to imagine, what that kind of first kind of ape-like mind, when two people started to kind of connect over rhythm, it's kind of like it's basically like it's a discovery where one person can transfer and experience their perception of time to another person, and that other person kind of feels that same perception. It's kind of like the birth of kind of another layer of empathy, because think about it, like prior to the understanding of rhythm, we weren't moving together. We weren't really connecting over a common understanding of time.
We weren't aware of it, right? Right. When the mother is walking with the child in her womb, there is a conveyance of a sense of rhythm.
Well, and then there were the larger nature rhythms, right, with the tide and the so forth.
Yes.
So it was kind of like a kind of, I guess, like a way to kind of understand rhythm in a more connected way, where we could kind of communicate it quicker to each other or something.
Well, it becomes conscious as opposed to unconscious.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, and the human person is then, well, maybe it's not even human at that point, but you start to create the rhythm rather than just respond to it, I feel. Participate in a different way. Yeah, and maybe that's one reason why, Darryl, I know that you're always talking about the connection of music and evolution, which I think is so important. But maybe one connection there is the fact that nature created the first music, with the whales singing and the waves having and the birds, and all of that happened way before humans caught on. So maybe there's a connection there between art and music helping us solve the climate crisis, because nature gave us that ability in the first place. If that makes sense. Might be a little out there, but
no, it
Steve,
makes sense.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say that, I mean, I have this instinctual feeling that always inside one's present moment is everything you need to face the situation that you're in. And this may be a total fantasy. It may not be true, but this is a narrative that informs my world. And so I think, you know, you hit upon something that you know, for humanity, in humanity's present moment, humanity has everything it needs to face this situation. And we may not become aware of it in time. There's always that risk, but it is there if we pay attention.
Yeah, I feel that. Like Steve says, I feel it, you know, like it's it's inside of.
Yeah. I wanted to invite Steve to share something that he sent to me right before this call happened. I didn't have a chance to watch it fully, but Steve, would you like to tell us more about that? Because it was
Yeah, I mean, there were actually two things, but
oh, okay, great.
But so I didn't send the second one. I'll tell you about the second one afterwards. But today, Prince Philip died. Right, old guy. Right, he's nearly 100, I think. Didn't quite make it to 100. So here's a man that had, quite frankly, a pretty awful childhood. Certainly was not nurtured and loved by his parents, and probably was found wanting. And at various times during his life and that of his eldest son, Prince Charles, yeah, they were at loggerheads together. But as we all know, most people know that Prince Charles has always been interested in all things green, and so it is very concerned about climate change. And you know, he met Greta as a result of that, and spent quite a lot of time with Greta and David Attenborough, who was one of Prince Charles's mentors. But it all started for Prince Charles when Prince Philip made a speech in 1970 talking about pollution and the damage that we do to our ecology. So here you have a man who, at the age of 99 and who's died, who held a significant position in Britain and around the world, who famously was the first, I think, patron of the World Wildlife Fund. Not many people realize that. And was somewhat of a conflicted ecologist, in as much as he fought hugely for biodiversity, but on the other hand, loved to go shooting wild animals, right? And famously during that time, he even shot a tiger, right? Which usually rankles with most people, but that's partly to do with his privileged, rather upper class upbringing, where, you know, one feels one can, I'm using one because I'm quoting him, sort of, one feels one can shoot anything. But he, you know, he died today, and his legacy certainly is seen in his eldest son, who one day will become the king, and also his eldest son, William, who has stepped into that breach. And I think one of the commentators said that Prince Philip was well ahead of his time on these matters. Prince Charles was ahead of his time, and I think it's Prince William that said it. And Prince William has said publicly that when his son asks him, he wants to make sure that he is also ahead of his time, because as Prince William said, and this is the Prince Philip's grandson, Diana's eldest son as well, as he said, if my son asked me, was I ahead of my time, and I wasn't, it's too late, quote unquote. And I thought that was a really nice thing from the royal family on this particular day when Prince Philip has left us. He was a crusty old devil, but he had amazing instincts. He once was in Madagascar, trying to get Madagascar to sign up to a World Bank loan, but they were required to do some conservation work, some active conservation work, and they didn't want to. And he was a helicopter pilot, so he took the president of Madagascar and several politicians in a helicopter, drove it himself, and showed them the damage that they were doing to their own flora and fauna by taking them in a helicopter and said, that's what you're doing. And the river was running red with some pollution, and said, that's you bleeding your own land. Sign the deal. And they did.
Wow.
Yeah.
Courageous.
Yeah.
Wow.
And the other one that I happened to see as a result of looking at the fact that Prince Philip's died was Greta. So Greta's come out in the last few days, and she thinks that the COPs conference, right, which is going to be held in Glasgow in Scotland, she thinks it should be postponed. She thinks that it should be postponed largely because of COVID, and the issue she's raising, which is quite a good one to raise, and it goes to her notion of equality, was the fact that the vaccine is not available in enough countries to enable enough representatives to actually make it to the conference. And she may have a point, because there is vaccine hoarding. And given that, you know, for my money, and we've spoken about it on several of these calls, the pandemic is I would say, an observational consequence of climate change. It's a symptom. So she's raised this issue that we're not looking after everybody. We're being very nationalistic about vaccinations and what have you. I think she's right.
Well, she's certainly the observation is, you know, incontrovertible. It's a fact. We're not looking after everyone.
Yeah, I just read that some countries won't get it until 2024.
Yeah, I mean, how nuts is that? You know,
Whoa.
And how many people will die because of that? And how many variants will there be that will, you know what I mean? Like, it's going to screw everything up.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. When will we learn? You know, I mentioned this in I was looking for the quote whilst we're talking, but I mentioned this before. But there's that film, The Day the Earth Stood Still, and
Yes.
in the modern remake of the film, which is Keanu Reeves plays the man from outer space, and the mad scientist that he ends up having a discussion with is John Cleese. And yeah, so in this scene, you know, John Cleese is pleading for him not to destroy the Earth, and he says to him, and it goes back to what you said, Greg, that it is only on the precipice that mankind has ever changed. So it goes back to, we have all the tools, we have all that we need, but sometimes until we stand on the precipice, you know, we don't do anything. And it, you know, the tricky thing here for me, I mean, it's a great quote. It doesn't necessarily mean anything. The problem is that climate change is relatively slow compared to our rather busy lives where we want instant gratification. And if there is a weakness in humanity, it is their desire for instant gratification, which colors their judgment. You know, because if you're not careful with climate change, as we already know, if you apply that instant judgment to things, that instant gratification gene, you will miss the point at which you can change things, or that, you know, you can prevent the worst things from happening. And I guess that's the fear that we all have, that maybe there aren't, you know, people just don't feel it enough. Until your chair gets hot, you don't get up. How hot does it have to get? And, you know, maybe it just doesn't cool down in time. But we shall see.
Yes, we shall see. Wow.
And
I actually didn't even realize that he had died, Prince Philip. So
it's today. It was only today. I mean, I mean, before lunchtime, he hadn't died. This all happened after lunch for me. Suddenly, it's all over the press. So yeah. So I mean, the personal tragedy is, you know, there you have the Queen, who's usually locked away, and everyone thinks, oh, you know, the Queen, she's you know, almost like God. And you know, and she, when she's appointed as the queen, when she's crowned, there is this religious ceremony, and she does, without doubt, believe that she is appointed by God to be the queen until the day she dies. However, if there's one thing that might rock the queen and then lead to her stepping down, this actually could be it, because they've been together well over 70 years.
Wow.
70 years married.
Can't imagine.
And you've got to feel for somebody. Yeah, losing your, you know, your partner, your life partner after that many years, that must be pretty tough. Pretty tough.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know how long the queen will last. I mean, I hope she carries on. I hope she steps down and enjoys life a little more personally. But yeah, we will see. But yeah, great legacy that he's left with his early insights into climate change.
Yeah, that he said that in 79 is crazy.
1970.
Yeah.
Oh, 1970. Yeah.
On that note, it's probably time to take it out. It's 9:29.
Yes, thank you all for a great conversation. Please subscribe to RChain on YouTube, follow RChain on social media, and if you'd like to become a member, you can do so at rchain.coop. And thank you all for a great discussion today.
Thank you.
Pleasure as always.
Bye, everybody.
Take care.